Hello, my name is Heath Jones, and welcome to the Northwood Podcast. Before we get into the meat of this episode, I should mention that if you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast by way of whatever platform you access it. Also, it would be wonderful if you would leave a review, as this will help the algorithms direct this podcast to more people, which would be great. If you'd like to learn more about Northwood, please visit our website at www.indyncc.org. That's ndncc.org. Or you can find us by searching for us on Facebook. Simply type in Northwood Christian Church and perhaps Indianapolis to specify which one, and we should pop right up. And I should also, before we move on, give a shout out to allindianapodcastnetwork.com for hosting this podcast, as well as dozens of other Indiana based podcasts, which you should check out. In a moment, we're going to dive into today's subject matter, but before we do, here are some ads. And we're back. And before we really dive in, I'd like to talk first about this word prophet. You may have noticed that this week's episode is called A Prophet in Our Midst, and I'd like to clear up some confusion about the word that has developed in modern times. For you see, in recent times, the word has come to be used to describe someone who can peer into the future and make predictions about the future. And this is unfortunate because in the biblical world, this is seldom what the word means. I would almost want to add, if ever, what the word means. This is a modern phenomena coming to use it as somebody who gazes into the future. In the Bible, a prophet almost always means someone who can accurately and sagely describe their current circumstance, perhaps an inspired teacher or preacher who can proclaim the will of God to the people in a specific time. So the prophet would look at a cultural landscape and proclaim it unjust or greedy or violent, and then describe what sort of transformation needed to occur for that culture to conform to life giving ways. This will be the sense in which we talk about a prophet throughout this entire episode, one who truthfully and in wisdom calls it like it is and then describes things as they ought to be. The passage that we will be considering first is found in Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. And it goes, he being Jesus, left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, and Joseph, and Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. This passage took me for a wild ride this week. Don't get me wrong, it certainly will preach. This passage, after all, contains that iconic line, "A prophet is not without honor in his hometown." And if we had read further, we would find that in the very next scene, Jesus sends out his disciples in groups of two. He instructed them on how to handle themselves should they face similar rejection. And his advice: pack light so you can move on quickly. So if you're not welcomed, clean the dust off from that town, off of your shoes, so as to take none of its taint with you. And these passages are easily relatable, and as I said, they certainly will preach. I can remember coming back to my childhood church after my first year away at college. I was even then training to be a pastor, and I learned a thing or two, or at least I thought I had, and I had even arranged to return home as a student minister whose role was to lead the youth and assist the pastor. I was even tasked with teaching an adult Sunday school class, so I thought I would wow them with my newfound knowledge. I thought I'd challenge them and correct their folksy, colloquial, quaint understanding of the scriptures and church history. In short, I was an arrogant young fool and was received as such, and that was probably almost certainly good for me. But do you know what I called it at that time? How I framed it to get myself off the hook or to assuage my insecurities? I called it, well, not quite persecution, but something edging that way. I considered myself something like a prophet without honor in my own town. It was a cathartic feeling to wipe the dust off of my shoes and to return to college for my sophomore year. Now, this Messiah complex, and I'll give it a name, that's what it was. This Messiah complex never leaves us overnight for those who are tempted by it. And in my first years of pastoring, now that I had a college degree in Christian ministries, I thought that I was about to reinvent the local church. And I had ideas, I had passion, I had answers to life's problems. I was every bit as old as 22. And rest assured, I let everyone know about it. I preached impassioned sermons calculated to convict and move hearts. I preached as one who knew that he had seen the face of God and was tasked with describing what he'd seen to a group of people who couldn't possibly understand. And when I was met with criticism of my style and when I was met with resistance to my ideas, again, a prophet without honor in my new hometown. This was, I explained to myself, why nothing I tried seemed to work. After all, Jesus could perform no deed of power, except heal a few sick people. So if Jesus was hamstrung by the lack of faith in his hometown, why not me? So I lamented the lack of faith I saw in others, and in doing so, I felt a bit better about myself. About 4 years ago, I left that church after serving there for 10 years. And whenever I talk about this passage, I know that there is very little chance for me to talk about it without leaning pretty hard into that bit about dusting off my shoes and leaving the past in the past. It's hard to frame these biblical passages, these stories, outside of our own contexts. I always see myself in the prophet who was rejected. So I want to air the laundry, tell of my hurt, describe the dirt that I've been trying to brush off my shoes. And in those moments, we should realize pretty straight away that maybe these passages shouldn't be taken as autobiographical. How arrogant for us to even think they're about us. And at this point, I've probably already said too much. And so let's pull it back. What if I am not the prophet in my own story, the mover and the shaker, the mouthpiece of God? And even as I say it aloud, I'm thinking, duh. That's where it hits you. How about if we perform a little thought experiment? How if for a few minutes we choose to consider that maybe we're not the primary prophet or even a prophet in our own story? How if we, for only a moment, try to see ourselves as one of Jesus' neighbors or perhaps as one of his family members as described in this passage? How if we can find the courage to demote ourselves to a fly on the wall and ask ourselves, who really is the prophet here? And what if we've been missing what has been right under our nose this entire time? And when I did it, everything changed. When you are able to shift the focus away from yourself for a moment or two, you begin to notice things that you don't notice at first. I began to wonder what prophets from my hometowns I have failed to notice or put my faith in. After all, we consort with any number of persons, all with their gift to give the world and a unique vision and wisdom. And are not disciples of Jesus living embodiments of Jesus in the world? And so if we know some other persons who are trying their best to live well as disciples, perhaps we are to listen to them. Aren't we supposed to see Jesus in our neighbor and the stranger? And if we do, the risk is always there that we might see the prophet in them. Now, we should never forget what happened next in the story, the part that we did not read. Jesus sends out his disciples with his own power and authority to wield, and they healed, they cast out demons, and they were also rejected in various places. The text reads that Jesus' ability to do deeds of power was diminished because of their unbelief. So I begin to wonder about my own unbelief in regards to other potential prophets around me. If only I could be amazed at my unbelief rather than complacent in it. How if there is a prophet sitting next to you at work, if you had the eyes to see? How many people have I overlooked because I was so focused on my own perceived slights and ways that I've been snubbed? And this forces us to consider who the prophets may be in our hometowns. Who are the prophets and reflections of God that we have failed to see or to believe in? When I thought about this, I was reminded of a man that I knew in my last church. His name was Marvin, and Marvin was a farmer, a good old boy who wore plaid denims and a wide-brimmed hat. He was a simple, humble, joyful, but quieter man, and he and his wife were just the cutest old couple that you ever did see. No one was about to take him for a prophet, not by a long shot. He was far too folksy and familiar. If he had owned the role, he would have been rejected. When he died, his children told me a story about their dad. Once he leased a piece of farm equipment to a neighbor, and I forget the details exactly, but it was something like this. The neighbor was supposed to pay him back at the end of the harvest. I think that maybe Marvin even helped his neighbor in the fields with that harvest. And when the time came and the harvest was in, the man told Marvin that he wasn't going to pay him back. Simple as that. And his children were furious. They told their dad that he ought to ruin the man's name, that he ought to go over to his neighbor's house and to give him a piece of his mind. His children said that their father sat back and said, to their frustration at the time, to their amazement today, he said, "No, I'm not going to do any of those things." And his children asked, "Well, why not?" And Marvin replied, "Because if he can live with it, I can live without it." And I've since applied those words to various circumstances in my own life, and it allowed me to let things go. And what I want you to know in this moment is Marvin was a prophet without nearly enough honor in his hometown. I wonder what other miraculous words and deeds we miss out on because we cannot see the prophet in our midst. I wonder how many other prophets have sat next to us on buses or walked past us on sidewalks that we cannot see because we cannot believe in the potential power latent or perhaps obvious in the persons who sit beside us, stand beside us, walk beside us as we go through life. But it gets even more surprising and sneaky than that. This business of prophets being right under your nose. A few years ago, I visited some relatives on the 4th of July, and my cousin told me a story about her daughter. They had found a dead rabbit in their backyard, and her daughter insisted that they give the rabbit a proper funeral. Maybe you've had a child who did something similar. And she was about 8 years old at the time, and her mother thought to herself, "It's just a rabbit." And at some moment during the proceedings, her daughter, perhaps perceiving her skepticism, said, "Mommy, we have to remember this rabbit. We can't ever forget it." And Mom asked, "But why?" And her daughter said, "Because God made all of the creatures and they are all important to Jesus." Pint-sized prophet. A prophet in miniature who, in the words of the poet Rumi, is small in size but sees enormous things. So who else is what I'm wondering? Who else? Who else is a prophet without honor? Who aren't we noticing or believing in? And whose full potential and worth are being overlooked because of our unbelief? Sometimes all that's needed is for someone to notice the power of God that is in someone else. And then they are empowered to do all that they can. Jesus did this when he sent out his disciples. He saw the power latent in them. The text reads, he gave them authority over unclean spirits. And Jesus noticed the prophets around him and sent them out with the power of God to do amazing things in the world. So who else? Possibly you. Definitely the children. Almost certainly someone you've never taken very seriously. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." In other words, those who are closest to the prophet are most apt to not believe it, to see it, to notice it. But you might read on and add in your own hometown, and he could do no deed of power at, say, Indianapolis, and many other places besides. So I'm wondering, in what ways do we stifle the power of God because we fail to notice the prophets in our own hometown? What prophets have been placed near you, voices speaking truth and wisdom that you have heretofore missed? A preacher willing to name the uncomfortable truths of our times? Maybe, but that'd be too obvious. Perhaps a prophet in the form of a child, or of a firebrand activist with an axe to grind. Perhaps an advocate for the poor, say. Well, all this to say their faces and their shapes are numerous. And if we are wise, we'll open our eyes and see them and grow the ears to listen. This has been the Northwood Podcast. As I said at the beginning, my name is Heath Jones. And if you'd like to learn more about Northwood, please visit our website at indyncc.org, www.indncc.org, or look us up on Facebook by searching for Northwood Christian Church, Indianapolis. Also, please check out all the other podcasts made possible by allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Until next time, grace and peace be with you.